A warm welcome to all of our ISM members and guests for today's program. Our speaker today is Jane Tierney, who will be speaking on strategies for negotiation. One size does not fit all. And it seems like negotiations is a really hot topic right now. So please be sure to ask her any questions by using the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll take the questions towards the end of the program. We will be recording this presentation, and I will be sending out the link later today with continuing educational credit for everybody. Now on to our presentation. Jane has been a previous speaker, and we would like to welcome her back. She founded her company Purple Link in 2015, recognizing there's a better way to obtain value and achieve results from the through supply chains. Clients discover innovative ways to identify waste and risk that leak dollars from the supply chain and drain the bottom line. Through collaboration and stakeholders and suppliers, Purple Link's approach reduces both cost and risk, and clients sustain savings and improvements year over year. Jane has earned both in industrial engineering and MBA degrees. She is passionate about Lean and Six Sigma. She is a certified green belt and has both her CPSM and CPSD certifications. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Jane.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm really happy to be back with this group and really happy to be talking about negotiation today. It's a big topic, and it's one that as a supply chain professional, we are always challenged to do better and get better results through our negotiations. So I'm going to share this with you because this is one of the situations I've encountered before. So when you sit down, you have somebody who says, just to get this off on the right foot, I don't intend to concede anything. So maybe you've encountered this guy before. I actually think he worked for me at one time. So maybe you guys are familiar with him as well. But what we find is that negotiations involve taking risks. Not everybody likes to do that. Not everybody likes to do negotiations. And because there's a lot of uncertainty there, and you have to ask yourself at the end, hey, did I really get a good deal? Did I do the best that I could? Should I have asked for more? Should I have given that away? Many of us walk away from these negotiations continuing to negotiate with ourselves on how good the outcome really was. We talk ourselves into or out of feeling that we got a good deal. Does that sound familiar to anybody? If it does, then you're not alone. I've worked with a lot of non-supply chain people who say they're really great at negotiation. And then they tell you the story about buying their car or maybe their house and what a great deal they got. Great negotiators know that there's lots of circumstances and lots of types of negotiations. When you buy a house or a car, it's usually a one and done scenario. It's not a relationship building situation because you're not going back to that same person to buy another house. And if you do go back maybe to a construction company, it's not going to be the same house. It's not going to be the same person probably that you're dealing with. The same with a car. Each deal is pretty much a single encounter, and then there's no need or no intention to continue another transaction. But oftentimes in supply chain and purchasing for a business, in my experience, it's common to work out an initial contract expecting future business dealings will be occurring. So you want to agree to a proposal for a set quantity and a time period, but you plan to be back in 6 months or the next year or 2 years to a follow-on agreement. And if you're doing that, as we are oftentimes in purchasing and supply chain, there's several things that we need to be considering. So let's take a look at those. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here and why I think I can talk about this subject. I founded Purple Link, as Kathy said, because I really believe that the knowledge and expertise I've collected is good to share with clients and with lots of different businesses. So I'm not really a natural negotiator or someone who views negotiations as a game and something that I really like to do, but it is an important part of being a competent supply chain professional. So I found that my first negotiations were really probably accepting jobs out of college. I was an engineering student, and at the time I got out, there were people hiring engineers, which was great. But I didn't really know what I was doing, and I did some things. Finally, got into procurement because I had a job that changed and I had to find something. So I ended up working for Hewlett Packard, but that job was in procurement. And it wasn't something that I was really familiar with. But I loved working with suppliers, being in and around the different types of factories. I found myself working all kinds of deals with suppliers all over the world. And I came to embrace this and realize that I found my true calling in working with suppliers. So I did a lot of negotiations, some very formal, sometimes very informal, and kind of just working through trying to figure out what we could do to work together better and get a best solution and a good outcome for the company I was working for and the supplier that we were dealing with. I didn't often think about these as negotiations, but in hindsight, they were in one form or another. And so in 2015, I left the corporate world to, again, run this business. I help clients get more value from their supply chains. I've done a lot of studying negotiation, as probably some of you have. I've taken some classes and done some different things. Negotiation, conflict resolution, change management, decision-making, all of those things kind of go into negotiation. So I've done those as a business person, and I did some of that from a theoretical perspective when I did my MBA program. And I find that a lot of those ideas are helpful. So I found some things that work well for me. I found some things that I keep in mind when I'm doing negotiations. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. So we're going to talk about preparing for negotiations. 3 steps to do that. 4 different approaches that people use for negotiation, 5 different styles of negotiation, and then I'll talk about why and how to use strategies for different situations. And then at the end, I have a raffle, and I'm going to give away some prizes. So I like to stay connected to you, and I see that there's a lot of you here today, so I'm very excited about that. I'm looking at the chat, seeing what there's going on. So yes, there's a lot of changes today, and we'll take the questions at the end with so many people, but please put your information in the chat. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give away a prize at the end, several prizes. So if you want to participate in that, you can send me an email right now to jane@purplelink.co. There's no M on that. And if you do that, you'll sign up, you'll get some ongoing resources, you'll be getting the slides from today's presentation, and you'll be eligible for the prize drawing at the end. And if you're not quite ready to do that, that's okay, because I'll give you another chance before I make the drawing at the end. So let's jump into this. These 3 prep steps. I know that a lot of you like to negotiate. Some of you don't like to negotiate. Some of you have some formal training in this. Some of you learned on the job. But I want to keep in mind that negotiated outcomes, they're not magical, and they're not reached because one party is luckier than another. They're the product of a combination of defining the outcome desired, having a plan to achieve that, and understanding your opposition or the other side of that. So these negotiations don't just happen, and you shouldn't kid yourself that you can just wing it and get the results that you want. So the first thing that you're going to need is a strategy, and a strategy is a plan. So a successful negotiating team usually has a playbook that they've put together, that they understand, all the participants understand. And it should have several different sections in this. It should have the outcome that you're wanting to get, the optimal outcome, because that's really the best case scenario. That's what you want. It's the blue sky, perfect world version. And some of that goes in there, but also what would be the best outcome for the team and for your company. You also need to agree on some of the minimum elements that you're going to accept. So you start with the high end and say, if I can get everything, it's going to look like this. And then, okay, maybe I can't get that. So what's the bottom? What's the least amount that we need to make this an acceptable outcome for our company and for this team and what we're doing. So it's kind of your possible settlement, something that you're willing to settle for. So to do that, you really need to be clear on what your needs and your wants are, and think about what's going to make you say yes for your team. You're going to look at things like the parts that meet spec, that they have acceptable quality levels, and you have those quality levels defined. Things are packaged correctly. All of those kinds of things, all of the things that you actually need in this negotiation to be there. And then you want to think about what the things that you would like to have. This is going to be part of your optimal outcome, but these are things that you don't have to have, including things like favorable payment terms. A lot of companies these days, if you're the customer, you want long payment terms, net 45, maybe net 60. I've even seen net 90. But if you're the supplier, you want shorter payment terms. So net 30 is okay, but you'd like to get maybe net 20 or maybe net 15. So think about what you're willing to give up there, where you want to start and what you can do with that. If you're the customer, net 45 is a good place to start, but you know that you can go to net 30 without too much pain from your company. So then be prepared to do that and be prepared to make that concession to try to reach an agreement. So you're looking at things like blanket orders, flexibility in quantities and delivery schedules, maintenance of tools, compensation for quality, or penalties for quality or delivery issues. You can remove penalties or you can add those as part of the negotiation. You're looking for commitments from your supplier on capacity or dedicated resources to help do that. And that could be on either side, that both sides are willing or not willing to dedicate resources to this partnership, to this agreement, so that you can make this work. Having a list really enables the negotiator and the negotiating team to throw these things out to improve the outcome and ultimately get what you want. Negotiators also need to know what's not and what can be offered in exchange. So what you might want to just give up in order to make that work. So you want to know what options you have. And then you want to look at the priorities of this, because you need to understand what your top issues are, your top needs, but then you also need to know what are your top wants. And everybody on the team needs to be aligned on this, so that if for example, if you want favorable payment terms like 2% net 10, that might help the supplier with their cash flow. It might help the customer wants to go to net 45, but if you can help your supplier and your company can afford that, then that might be a really good thing to do to try to get some other concessions. Maybe your company has goals for small, diverse businesses that most companies do today, and that's going to be helped by getting the supplier into your supply base. You might be looking for a lot of different things that you can have. So know your options, know your priorities. The second thing you want to really do is to know the opposition's position. So prior to a negotiation, you've been looking at things from them, you have inputs from them, their proposal. You should know a lot about what they need and what they want. But you really want to document this and make sure, again, all your negotiating team has this in mind, so you anticipate what that other side's perspective is and how they're structuring their position strategy. Preparing includes trying to think like your opponent and creating counterpoints or balancing those in advance so that you can do that during the negotiation. Prioritizing helps here too, and you really want to look at, again, options and possible packages that can lead to that negotiation that's going to be a successful negotiation for all. And then finally, the third thing you need to have is, what is your walk away point? Because sometimes you can't reach a solution and one party's not able to or chooses not to complete the negotiation. It's not asking for an adjournment or a recess to regroup, because you can do that anytime during the negotiation. So it's not convening at a later time, but it's the position where you say, we're not going to get to where we need. I'm not getting my needs met. You're not getting your needs met with my options. So then we have to know where that line is. And you want to know that it's connected to your needs, and know that when you can't reach this agreement is where you're going to walk away. Before you reach that point, you want to project and analyze impacts, costs, disruptions that ending that relationship might cause. My own personal philosophy is never walk away without an option or an alternative to pursue. So I never tell somebody, no, I can't do anything unless I have something, a plan B in my back pocket. So you want to make sure that you don't walk away with nothing, because then you say, okay, now we start over. You don't really want to do that. You can take a breather, and that can be beneficial. That can give parties time to think and maybe make some calls and check in with some other people. But walking away is a really difficult decision to make. It should be done rarely, because hopefully you've done enough work up front that you don't get to that point. But that's a key part of the negotiation, and the preparation is knowing where that point is. So understand those implications and hit the bullseye every time. So part of the strategy step that we just talked about includes reviewing the power of both sides and the ways that they can be used by your side or used against you. Power in negotiations is defined by this lack of need in the negotiation versus the wants, or more often downplaying or disguising the dependency that you and your team have on the outcome or on the relationship here. So one power that can help you out, if you have in your back pocket a BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. That goes along with the walk away point. So if you have that and you've developed that ahead of time, then your team is all aligned with that. You can look at alternatives, and doing this exercise also can spark some creativity around alternatives and options that might let you get a successful negotiation before you get to a point of walk away. If you can shift that balance of power or reach more of an equitable balance, you're going to get better results. Then you want to consider the power of perception. This may be in somebody's title, a role in the company, maybe just in the negotiation, or maybe with a possible outcome. For example, I've seen good negotiators get really flustered when the other side brings somebody new into the negotiation. Somebody with a title, a high up title, or a position description that says, this is our champion, or this is our VP of X. If you've planned a negotiation with someone, maybe a director, and suddenly the vice president appears as their heavyweight, that can make people a little bit nervous. And perhaps you might feel that bringing in a particular subject matter expert would help you make a stronger case or give you a stronger team for the negotiation. So these strategies should be around the issues more than titles and intimidation, because intimidation is not really a good tool to use. A little bit of that can help a little sometimes, but it can backfire, and it can erode your credibility as a negotiator if you try to use someone or you try to use an intimidation tactic. So be careful when you do those kinds of things. And the third type of power is really psychological. You and your team may feel like underdogs in a negotiation, and that can be a big liability. For example, you're a small company and you're dealing with a very large company, or vice versa. You need this technology very badly. You maybe feel like you're being held hostage to this company because you may be the customer in the bigger company, but they are the smaller company with the technology that you desperately need to put into your products. So if you get this psychological piece, that can swing the balance of power. Confidence is really a formidable opponent. So make sure you and your team are prepared. You know your position, you know your strategies, and you have positive attitudes and expect a good outcome. Sometimes that fake it till you make it, or acting as if, can really help increase your confidence, and then can help you achieve your objectives, and can really help you be that little bit of edge that it takes to prevail and be successful in your negotiation. So we're going to go through 4 approaches now, because I think these are important to share with everybody. So these 4 approaches are reasons for entering into the negotiation in the first place. They describe what's sought as a final outcome. So hopefully these look familiar. These are not styles of negotiating, and we're going to get to those in a couple minutes, but these are analogous to the styles, and I'll show you how they work together. These approaches are more aligned with the motivation for the negotiation and are a pathway to get your desired outcome. You want to consider your approach along with the strategies and your desired outcome. All of that should align. Think about the drivers for your negotiation, why we haven't been able to reach an agreement thus far, or what we're hoping to resolve and finalize through this process. So here's these 4 approaches, and we'll go through these in a little more detail. The first is value or value add. The second is a singular focus. The third is combining forces. And lastly, a winner and loser approach. So let's take a look at those one at a time. The value or value add. When you can look at a negotiation, not just as needing an agreement, but as an opportunity for creating synergy. You're going to add value for both organizations, and you're going to have a win-win scenario. This isn't the best style to use for a one and done deal, like buying a house or a car, or when one party has significant amount of leverage over the other. But seeking added value works really well when you're dealing with suppliers or customers that you plan to work with on an ongoing basis, or when you're working to finalize a long-term deal. It's important to have this bare minimum level of requirements that you're working toward that are going to define the success you have, and also to have a projection of what the other side bottom line is. So make sure both parties have reasonable requests, that there aren't any glaring showstoppers for either side. And that goes back to your preparation. So what we're doing with this value add is we're looking for ways to expand the pie and create value that will establish or reinforce long-term relationships and provide mutual gains now and over time. So when you're in it for the long haul, when you're looking for ways to expand on a relationship or to solidify a relationship, take a value or value add approach. Sometimes negotiations are focused around a primary outcome. For example, the lowest price, or maybe the earliest delivery, or a certain level of quality or functionality of the product. In that case, take a look at the expected longevity of the relationship. Again, is this a one and done transaction, or is this building on existing relationships and laying foundation for a relationship that you want to continue? Consider this really carefully, because if your desire is to drive to the lowest price, or the only thing that matters is hitting a certain delivery date, then you do want to push for that at all costs. But understand that you can win that battle and maybe lose the war. Sometimes there's an opportunity to not only meet the needs of both parties, but to satisfy some of these wants. So if price or delivery is really paramount, and it sometimes is, this is a good style. But don't torch the relationship that may be needed for the foreseeable future in order to get that one singular focus. Or I guarantee you're going to pay more over time in a variety of ways. So if you need the relationship to continue, push for your top priority. If it's absolutely the singular focus, then you can use that approach, but think about if there's other things that might help as well. This third style is cooperation. And this works well when parties have or perceive an imbalance. If one company is bigger than the other, if one company has more power that we talked about. So you want to examine all points of view and demonstrate to the other party that you understand their position, but not really acquiesce to all of their requests. It's a softer view of the situation. But if you temper that, it can lead to really good outcomes for both parties. If you're buying parts from a company that's been hit hard financially by the pandemic, for example, maybe you can commiserate and share your personal or your company's experiences to demonstrate that understanding. That style can be effective. But the caution is not to let the empathy be overtaken by sympathy, which can lead to unsatisfactory conclusions. So if you're working with a company that needs some money down, then go work with your company and see if you can't get a down payment with the purchase order and you can't help them out in a way that's reasonable. But watch, again, the difference between empathy and sympathy. Empathy is really good. Sympathy can let your guard down and lead to a not so great outcome for you. So know what concessions you can offer before you start the negotiation. If you know that your other partner needs money, then think about what you can do in terms of a down payment or incremental payments throughout the course of the contract. And avoid getting tricked into giving up more than you can afford or that you intended to do. Look to cooperate with and accommodate the other party, but also maintain your own boundaries and your own needs and your own priorities. Don't fall into a trap of meeting the other party's wants at the expense of your needs. If you're faced with this, look for other areas of opportunity to cooperate. So look for different areas where you can work with them, look for different options. I'm all about options when I'm negotiating. Think about what are the different things you can do. And then finally, there's the approach that we hear from a lot of people, how they asserted their position and they won. They beat the other party soundly. That happens in negotiations, but in truth, this approach rarely leads to satisfying long-term outcomes for relationships that need to be maintained. Again, if you do this buying a car or a house, this is a great thing, and you can feel good about it until you sell that car or that house. But if there was a relationship prior to that negotiation and you go in at all costs to win and pound the other company, then it can really deteriorate the relationship and it can be a hard thing to mend. So you can be confident and emphatic in inserting your side's position. That's a beneficial thing with it when you have a strong opponent. But if you overdo it, you can miss a lot of opportunities and you may require some damage control. And believe me, watch out if you have to go back to the negotiating table with this organization. I've seen this more times than I'd like to admit, that the company really pounds on the other one, whether it's the customer or their supplier, and they feel like they won. But you go back a year later, 2 years later to negotiate another round, or you get extra business that you didn't anticipate, and now you have to negotiate again. And that company comes back not so friendly and not so willing to take the beating that they took before. In fact, now they're trying to make up for some of that. And I've been in those negotiations when I didn't have anything to do with the first one and trying to mend those fences and get a good deal the subsequent time can be really, really difficult. So be careful about those. When you think about the strategy, the opposing viewpoint, and the walk away option, think about what type of approach you want to use. Again, how important is the outcome? Do you have a solid BATNA and other options that you have for alternatives? Are you and your company counting on a strong result from this negotiation with no real backup plan, or do you have several options you can do? What would the short-term pain be, and what would the long-term pain be? Then you want to add to that the implications of the relationship. Add the ramifications from various outcomes to that relationship. Is there a relationship already established? And if so, what's the status of that? If this is what would you like it to be after the negotiation? That's one way to look at it. Or what do you expect it will be after you reach this agreement? If it's short-term association, that's one thing to think about. If this is for the long term, then these are important. And if you think about these two, outcome and relationship, as axes with a low to high spectrum, it looks sort of like this. What you end up with is, and if the relationship is of low value, and then consider the significance of the outcome. So your relationship is low, then you might be looking at different ways to handle that. You want to look at different, the singular focus, the win-lose, the expanding the value in here is with the high relationship value and the high outcome importance. So think about how these weigh against each other and what you want to do. So when you're thinking about your goals, your focus for this, then be prepared. When relationships are important, are going to be needed in the future, an outcome of cooperation should be a target. Or in cases that both relationship and outcome are highly valued or very important to both to you or to both organizations, then you want to seek to collaborate for the best solution. But you can see that there's not a one size fits all in this negotiation. There are different approaches that you can use, and they apply to multiple areas of this spectrum. For example, your singular focus can be here if if that's what is important is your relationship, or if you have like a price kind of thing. That can be at either end of the spectrum. Combining forces can be when it's low outcome, low relationship, or when you're really trying to maintain and sustain that. The win-lose outcome is of importance and the relationship is not. And then expanding the value is when you're trying to expand the relationship, and this is very important to your company. So those are the approaches. Now we're going to take a look at styles of negotiation. And most people have one or more of these that they kind of go to on a default basis. This is an area where sometimes you have to become a little bit of an actor, and you have to take on a different role than maybe comes naturally to you. So think about which style of these is your natural kind of behavior, and think about which is going to be the most useful for you, because your preferred style may not be the one that fits the situation in your negotiation the best. So the first one we're going to look at is avoidance. We all know people who are conflict avoiders or people pleasers, and people that are reluctant to challenge another's position or even stick up for themselves. If this is your natural style, you may not be the best suited as the lead negotiator, but all of us can learn, and all of us can take on other skills, which negotiating is one of. And sometimes avoiding may be a really good option when an issue is small or when it's going to sort itself out in short order. If it's not a priority to either organization, sometimes that wait and see can be a good strategy to take. A supplier may want to work out a new delivery schedule for some prototypes they're building, but you know that your design team is having problems and they may slip the schedule anyway. Or they may be able to eliminate or completely redesign the parts that the supplier is making. So the impact of that supplier missing the delivery date may not be a big deal to your company. So you're prepared to pay an agreed upon price no matter when they're delivered, but you don't really want to get into all the scenarios of making changes and fussing over being late versus being on time until you have some more insight from the engineering team. So if you avoid a decision, that might be okay, because it might just work itself out over time. So that can be a good strategy, but it also can be detrimental if it needs to be resolved. A second thing to look at is accommodating. So prioritizing the relationship over the outcome of the issue. When one party readily makes requested allowances, this style can save both parties a lot of time and effort, and it can preserve the relationship, which may be really in alignment with your longer term strategy. So if you can accommodate, if they're easy things to accommodate, small changes in schedule, or maybe team members, or maybe payment terms that your company can easily make happen. Again, you want net 45, that's your standard, but this company really needs net 30 and they need some down payments, and your company can afford that cash flow wise, then if you can accommodate and it's going to make for a better outcome, then do that. The third negotiation style is competition. When you compete in negotiation, that puts one side's needs ahead of everything else, except the need to reach the agreement. It's definitely a win-lose trade-off. Either I beat you or you beat me, and I'm not a good loser. So if you don't have a relationship with the other party and you don't require one, go compete for it. Again, buying a house, buying a car, even buying things like capital equipment. If you're not too concerned, if the other party isn't really happy, because you're not going to be dealing them with the aftermath, and they won't see the consequences, or the consequences will be almost nil from the outcome of this. Be careful if you're buying capital equipment and you need maintenance and you need supply spare parts and replacement parts, because you might get a good deal up front, but you might pay for it at the end. So again, think about this holistically, what you need now and what you're going to need over time. The fourth area is compromise. And compromise is a give and take situation. And a lot of people think of negotiations as a compromise. I want this, so if you let me have it, I'll give you something else in return. It's kind of like kids playing Go Fish, where you say, I want sevens, and you know that you don't want sevens, you want nines, so what can you give and what can you get? It's not really an accommodating strategy, but it's not seriously competing either. Agreements can be reached fairly quickly if both parties agree to give a little to get a little. It maintains the relationship because neither party really is getting their optimal solution, but they both satisfy needs and they're content with the outcome, at least until you come back to the table for another round of negotiation. And the final style is always my preferred style, and what I recommend for negotiations that involve parties who have or seek long-term relationships and have a vested interest in achieving a strong positive outcome. Parties have to be open about their needs and wants. They have to both seek that win-win solution, which might take a little longer than other methods. And I've actually had people tell me that's not possible. Win-win isn't possible. It has to be a win-lose scenario. That's not exactly somebody I want on my negotiating team for certain situations. But outcomes that are worth it involve both parties meeting at least some, if not all, of their needs and some of their wants. It may take some innovation, some creativity. It can take a little longer to do this, to construct a final solution, but it's going to reinforce the relationship and it's going to benefit the bottom line for both. So parties are usually willing to do this. And this is a highly prized outcome for both customers and suppliers. So let's look at these in a little more detail. Avoiding. Again, this is not always a bad strategy to use. It's not always a bad style, because we know that people are conflict avoiders and people pleasers. So if you're not pressed for time to resolve this, if that has no consequences or low consequences, or you think it's going to be resolved another way, that's a perfectly good style to use. Be careful if your personal style, your own preferred style, is to avoid, because that may not get you the outcome that you want. So avoiding is a fine style in certain situations. Accommodating. Again, prioritizing the relationship over the outcome. If the relationship has high value and you have the capacity to include a lot of things, that's a great style to use. If it's not in that area, then be careful to be, the caution is to not be too accommodating. The more you accommodate that cost you something, that's not the good situation. If you can accommodate things that don't cost anything or cost very small amounts, then that's a good thing. And you should be able to do that. That can win that, and that can improve the relationship. So if you need to improve in a relationship with a company that you're negotiating with, then lay out those areas that you can accommodate and understand what you can do beforehand. That can help really repair a relationship, and that can help solidify it to go forward. Competition, again, this works well when you have the singular focus, when you don't have much of a relationship, that you either don't have one or don't need to preserve one. I recommend this for limited transactions and when there are limited consequences, because competition is a good thing. And if you're opening up a bid and you want lots of companies to respond, then you want that competition and you want them to be as competitive as possible. So that can work for the first stage, for the RFQ stage or the RFP stage. Come bring your best proposal to me. And then after you select the proposal, then you can go back and negotiate the fine points. This is an area where a lot of companies I see say, oh, well, we selected them, that's their proposal, we're stuck with that. No, 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 no. When you have a proposal, when you have a supplier selection, a strategic sourcing activity, and you go through your activity to compare the different suppliers, you select that supplier. Once you select them, then you can go in with that supplier and negotiate fine points or make changes or whatever. So it's not marring the competitive edge of that, if that's important for you. And I worked in defense and government procurement, and I know that it's very important to be very fair with that. But once you do that fair analysis and comparison and make your selection, it's more than fine for you to go in and negotiate some of the points over and above that. So if you need to make changes or you need to solidify that final agreement, you can negotiate with that chosen supplier to do that. So this is a good style to use when you have kind of a multi-phase project that you're doing. Compromising, again, compromise is a common approach. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a completely satisfying result. It is more palatable to many people than the actual competition. So you feel like at least if I'm giving something, I'm getting something in return for that. And this allows companies and people to maintain some dignity through this process. So this is an area where if dignity and relationships are important, then this is an approach that you can use. Even if you're kind of using one of the other strategies, you can kind of couch it in this compromise to let people, to keep that relationship going and to let an individual maintain some dignity. And then again, collaboration. This is always my favorite. If I have the time to do it, and if it's important, both relationship and outcome to me. You do need vested interests from both parties, and you need both parties to approach this as a win-win scenario. If my company comes in as a win-win attitude, and I'm facing a company who has a very strong win-lose attitude, that can be very difficult. So this is an area where you want to say, let's make sure that we're addressing the needs of both parties, that we want a long-term relationship and we want a good outcome for both of us. If the other party isn't doing that, then you want to find another probably style to use for this, or work them a little harder to say you can do this. This again may take more time than some of the other approaches and styles, but it can be very, very helpful in the end. So let's look at both of these styles and approaches. So we have these styles. So avoiding should be used here when it's low relationship, low outcome importance. So again, these two axes, the relationship and the importance of the outcome, are very significant to the company and should be part of your preparation. Accommodating is very high on the relationship, not so much on the outcome of that. Competing, high for outcome, not so much for the relationship, because relationships get damaged sometimes when you have head-to-head competition. Compromising is more in the middle. You're trying to maintain the relationship, but you're also trying to get a reasonably good outcome. And then collaboration, when you really want to have a good relationship and the outcome. And if we overlay that with back to the styles, again, compete is very much win-lose, but compete also can be very much a singular focus. The singular focus can be on the relationship if that's the real focus, the relationship itself. Combining forces and compromise, those kind of go well together. But combining forces can also be low relationship, low outcome importance, because you're just trying to get the best deal done as quickly as possible. And then expanding the value typically goes along with collaboration, because again, you're trying to get a win-win scenario, both parties to do this. So if you've been listening, you've heard me repeat some themes through this presentation. No style is good or bad, and any style can work under certain circumstances, and the wrong style or approach can lead to disaster, and no matter how simple the negotiation could be. So considering the approach and the style from the negotiation are really critical. But the other thing that I've touched on, but I haven't really emphasized, is the time factor. Formal negotiations take time. They take time to prep and they take time to conduct. This prep time should be a bigger investment than the actual negotiation itself, but I see some organizations that don't put very much time into the preparation, so then they end up with prolonged negotiations because they're hashing over things that maybe a little preparation could have helped work through more quickly. So when you consider that approach and style, think about the time constraints that you have as well. And as I said, the impact and the possible consequences from a poor agreement or no agreement really need to be considered. If this negotiation is significant to your company's revenue, has a high dollar value, involves sole or sometimes single source suppliers, involves a lot of IP of either company, then it's going to be a priority to your company. Do the homework, do the preparation, do the analysis, and document needs and wants from your stakeholders. Make sure you include the right stakeholders in your team in order to get the best outcome. And then also make sure your supplier or your other party is doing the same thing. Then review the relationship importance. Again, relationships are more important than ever. And if you didn't see that during the pandemic, then I'm not sure where you were, because I know most of my clients had relationships that they relied on very heavily during the pandemic to do things. They had to build relationships in some cases from the ground up. Other times, relationships that they thought were solid ended up not being so solid because we saw some price gouging and people trying to take advantage of that. So those relationships are important. So think about what you need now and then in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. Do you have substitutes? Do you have switching costs involved? Are there other parts that you buy from this supplier that might be affected by this negotiation? If relationships are not that important, then you can use a lot more and different approaches. If you plan to have more business with this supplier, then you might want to proceed with caution on some of the styles and the approaches we talked about. And finally, you need to consider just how quickly you need to conclude this negotiation. If time is of the essence, your approach might be more direct, targeted, and you might do more compromise instead of collaboration or cooperation. If time isn't an immediate constraint, then you can consider more of the collaboration and the added value. The other thing is, these don't just apply to formal negotiations. When you have a discussion with the supplier and you're trying to work out something, think about these approaches and these styles. What do you want to get out of this discussion? Is it something you can easily accommodate? Okay, then maybe you should do that. Is this something where it's really important to you to get your side? So you might have to take that more singular focus approach, or it might be more competing. You really need this faster, but the supplier wants more money in order to do it faster. So you're competing on what you're going to do. So it is for formal negotiations, but it's for informal negotiations too. These issues that come up that we're trying to resolve a lot. So what I know for sure is there's a better way to negotiate than pounding your fist on the table, walking out, leaving the other side alone to stew, or constantly calling for sidebars so that you're leaving the room. I've seen things that kind of floored me, and I'm sure some of you have similar stories. So in supply chain, negotiation is mandatory. We're always working with suppliers to polish the deal, to improve conditions for our employers. So expecting to achieve an ideal outcome every time is like saying that every time you go to Las Vegas, you win big, because it's not really very, very realistic, and it's not going to be true. So don't set yourself up for disappointment. do the preparation, look at a variety of potential outcomes, and know your own positions, priorities, and pain points. No single style or approach is going to be good for every situation, but every situation can be analyzed and appropriate goals and strategies developed to achieve a satisfactory outcome. Know your own go-to style, and if possible, have a variety of styles on your team to complement and balance those out. Outline your desired outcomes, choose a style to support that. If it's not natural for you, practice it and make notes on things to say or not to say. Take steps to put down steps that you can take during the discussions, and have each other coach each other inside and outside of the negotiation to make sure that you're staying on your plan and with your strategy. Use those three aspects of outcome importance, relationship value, and available time to help prepare for success. It's, know whether you can really walk away. If you can't reach a mutually satisfying agreement, personally, I never threaten to walk unless I'm fully prepared to leave empty-handed. Because once you say no, thank you, goodbye, it can be very difficult to get back to that table and try again. So if you're really ready to walk, then be ready to walk. I worked for a company that had a really difficult supplier, one my employer wanted to kick to the curb. But this supplier designed and produced a product that complemented other products we produced, and one that was really popular with our customers. We decided to design our own version of this product, which was really not an easy task with patents and IP held by the supplier. So we needed a significantly different approach to the design to avoid patent infringement. Eventually, our engineering team came up with a workable product, and we chose to walk away from any future negotiations, leaving things pretty much on a sour note with that supplier. Lo and behold, we discovered that our new design wasn't backwards compatible with all of our customer systems. And after frustration and teeth gnashing, we had to crawl back to the original supplier for their product. They were gracious enough to eventually accept our orders, but only after some significant price hikes and insisting on minimum order quantities. That was a real ouch, and it still hurts to think about it. So be careful about what you do. Consider what that may mean to both parties. So now you've got a little bit different take on negotiation. I realize it's complicated. It's a complex topic. If you're like me, you go to these talks and then you get inspired, but once you get back to the office, which is in about 10 minutes, then you get distracted and pulled away by the disruption of the day, and you don't, you're not able to implement that. All of that can be really frustrating. So if you think about your company, your upcoming negotiations, your support system, if you need some help with this, if you don't have the people in your corner that are going to help you make these successful, then I invite you to consider working with me. If you would like to get started talking about this, you can do a free callwithjane.com, and that takes you to my calendar. You can set up some time for us to talk, pick your time zone, select a meeting time, and all of that. So if you're thinking about that, that's great. If you want to do that later, I'm going to give you an incentive to do it right now. So you can do that. And so if you schedule this call by the end of tomorrow, you're going to get the slides from this presentation and some my webinar series. I do webinars twice a month. I've done them this year. I think we're going to do them once a month next year with a little short blog article in there. So you'll get those if you do the free call with Jane, and it's a free call. So here's your last chance. If you want to be part of this raffle that I'm going to do here, then I'm going to take some questions. So send me an email to purplelink.co, and you can put webinar in the subject or whatever. And anybody that sends me a email right now is going to get a copy of the slides as well. So, all right, let's see if we can take some of these questions while I'm using my little random number generator thing here to pick a winner. So, Kathy, if you're there, do you want to go through some questions?
Sure, we have a few actually. Let me get the first one. This was from Kimberly. How do you handle a supplier that is sole source and they're not meeting or getting close to our needs?
You need to have some pretty specific discussions with them. You need to be very, very clear about what your expectations are and your requirements. If you're, and you should be shopping for another one. So I understand you say it's sole source, but you should be shopping at the same time, because that's one way to actually add leverage is if you say, look, we don't want to move, but we found another supplier that's going to do this. It's going to be a real pain in the neck for us. We'd rather stick with you, but let's see if you can't do this to us. You need to make sure that you're discussing this at the right appropriate levels too. You might need to escalate and get very senior level managers involved in a discussion like that. Hope that helps. You have another question? I'm not sure Kathy's there. Let's see what else we have. What are strategies to manage cost increases when you have dwindling asset count with a vendor? Strategies to manage the cost increases. So it helps if you can do that as a long-term thing up front. Again, look at it for what is the balance between the power, what is the balance between the long-term relationship and whatever. Software renewals are tough, and sometimes they just say this is what the price is. I've talked to a lot of people who've tried to buy like iPads from Apple, and Apple doesn't really negotiate. They say, you want them, this is the price. And I worked for one company who said, you know, yeah, but we're going to buy like 1,500 of them and we're going to do this and that. And they said, yep, we told you the price. So if that's the situation, then you just have to, sometimes you just have to bite that bullet. Is the vendor claiming sole source, or has the agency recognized sole source? Okay, sole source is the big deal. I think that's somebody helping to answer that. So that's good input. Let's see. Is it worthy getting to negotiations after releasing a poor quality or very general RFP? Or is it better to restart the process? I'm going to give you my favorite answer to that, and it depends. So what's the time factor involved? Do you have time to start over, or do you have time to do a reset in the RFP? Sometimes you have significant changes to the RFP, like from a design perspective or something, and you kind of have to do a reset. So it might be that you can use that kind of rationale and say, look, we've had a major reset in this, or it may be, let's just start over. Documenting stakeholders' priorities and concerns. Should things go bad, is an advanced sourcing survival tactic? Yes. Document your plan, that's important. What's the best way to handle quantity restraints on materials needed? Allocation. So when you have allocations, then you're looking for every kind of leverage that you can get. So it's really very important to know, again, what your options are and have some backup plans for that. Oh, I got just a bunch more of these. 1, 2, 3.
And I noticed Gwen had her hand raised. Did you want to put in a question, Gwen? Nope, a couple of more questions.
Okay, I'm okay. I'm trying to get my wheel spinning here. Let's see. Okay, let's see who this is. So the winner is going to be Trisha Candler. Trisha, are you there? Are you still here? I hope. If you are, Trisha, you need to email me again and send me an address where I can ship the book.
Yes, she's on.
Awesome. Okay. So send me another email with an address and I'll ship your book. And again, here's my, here's the call with Jane. If you want to set something up, you're welcome to do that. I'm happy to have you on my calendar this year or next year. And if not, then as Kathy mentioned, I'm a CPSM and CPSD qualified instructor. I'm going to do some classes in 2022. So I'll give Kathy that information and she can share it, or you can contact me directly and I'll give you that information as well. Or you can go to the website, which is purple-link.net. So that's what I have. Again, Kathy, I appreciate this. I wish you all very happy and safe holidays. And I'll take other questions if there are.
I actually had two. We are out of time, but I could do the last one. Is inflation good for procurement?
Oh, usually not. But it can be if you have existing relationships and you have ways to control costs and kind of avoid the inflation by staying with a particular supplier because they've been able to buy product ahead of time or anything like that. So it can be helpful.
Okay.
But in general, it sucks for everybody.
Of course. I figured that was going to be
Open
the
book
answer.
negotiations, I see that. I love open book negotiations. The more information that you share, the better result you can get. People don't think that, but you don't have to share everything. But if you share basic information like cost drivers and cost models, you can really get a much better outcome.
Oh, thank you, Jane. Thank you for another informative program. And as I told everybody earlier, we will be emailing the recording link to this program and continue educational credit for you as well. Be sure to tune in to next week. We're actually running 2 programs, so we are very busy here. December 8th, we're doing a session from our Women in Empowerment series. It's called Forget the Fairy Tale. And then on December 9th, we're doing Beyond Value Savings. So be sure to register for one of these programs or for both of them. At this point, I'd like to say thank you, everybody, for joining us and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.